In 1996, a company called 3DFX made gamers see real 3D graphics for the first time. By 2002, they were dead, killed by a company that would become the most valuable chip maker on Earth, the graphics card, the most expensive, most argued about, and most scalped component in your entire PC, the thing that determines whether your games look like real life or a slideshow, the component that costs more than some people's rent. Nvidia versus AMD, green team versus red team. A rivalry so intense that people will defend their GPU choice like it's their firstborn child. You bought an AMD card, someone will tell you why Nvidia is better. You bought Nvidia, someone will tell you about AMD's value. There is no peace, only war. But this war didn't start with Nvidia and AMD. It started in the 1990s when 3D graphics were a miracle. Frame rates were measured in single digits, and a company called 3DFX changed everything, then disappeared completely. Welcome to the GPU wars, where silicon becomes religion, benchmarks become scripture, and but can it run crisis became the question that defined an entire era. This is every GPU war explained, from voodoo magic to ray tracing reality. Let's go. The birth of 3D. Picture a world where games look flat, sprites, 2D backgrounds, maybe some fake 3D if you squint. That was gaming before 1996. And then a company from San Jose said, what if games actually looked three-dimensional? And the entire industry changed overnight. 3DFX didn't just enter the market, they created the market. The dedicated gaming GPU wasn't really a thing until they made it one. In 1996, 3DFX released the Voodoo graphics. Not Voodoo 1, they just called it Voodoo Graphics because there was nothing to compare it to. They invented the category. Everything else was irrelevant. The Voodoo was a 3D accelerator, a card that only did 3D graphics. You still needed a separate 2D card for your desktop. It was weird, it was expensive, it was also magical. Games that ran at 10 FPS suddenly ran at 30. Textures that looked like mud became recognizable objects. Fog and transparency effects appeared. It was like going from standard definition to HD, except HD didn't exist yet. In 1998, 3DFX dropped the Voodoo 2, and this is where they achieved total dominance. The Voodoo 2 was so good that it became the standard. Game boxes literally had 3DFX compatible stickers because that's what everyone owned. But here's the craziest part, you could buy two Voodoo 2 cards and run them together. 3DFX called this SLI, Scanline Interleave. Yes, Nvidia didn't invent SLI. They bought the name later. 3DFX did it first. Two Voodoo 2 cards gave you nearly double the performance. It was expensive, hot, and required 2 PCI slots. It was also the most powerful gaming setup money could buy. 3DFX was untouchable. While 3DFX dominated, competitors were watching, learning, planning. Nvidia released the Riva TNT, competitive, but not quite there. ATI had the Rage series, decent but forgettable. Other companies like S3, Matrox, and PowerVR were fighting for scraps, but 3DFX made a critical mistake. They got arrogant. They refused to license their technology to other card manufacturers. They bought a board partner to make cards themselves. They thought they didn't need anyone else. While 3DFX was busy being corporate, Nvidia was busy being hungry. And in 1999, Nvidia would fire the shot that started the real GPU war. In August 1999, Nvidia announced the GeForce 256. And they did something genius. They called it the world's first GPU, graphics processing unit. Not a 3D accelerator, not a video card. A GPU. Was it technically true? Debatable. Did it matter? Not even slightly. Nvidia owned the narrative, they coined the term. And the GeForce 256 was better than 3DFX's newest card. The 3DFX era was ending. The Nvidia era was beginning. And the war? The war was just getting started. Nvidia versus 3DFX. Picture Goliath versus a slightly smaller Goliath who's been lifting weights while Goliath was getting complacent. 3DFX had the brand recognition, Nvidia had the better technology, and in the tech industry, technology always wins eventually. This wasn't just a competition, this was a destruction. Nvidia didn't just beat 3DFX, they annihilated them. The GeForce 256 was impressive, the GeForce 2 was domination. Nvidia released the GeForce 2 GTS in April 2000, and it crushed everything 3DFX had. Better performance, better image quality, hardware transform and lighting that made games look genuinely next-gen. 3DFX responded with the Voodoo 5, a card that was late, a card that was hot, a card that required an external power connector, something considered barbaric at the time, and it still couldn't beat the GeForce 2. The Voodoo 5 6000 with 4 GPUs was supposed to be their comeback. It was never released. Prototypes exist, they're collector's items now worth thousands, a monument to what could have been. By late 2000, 3DFX was dying. They'd burned cash on acquisitions. Their cards weren't competitive. Their board partners had abandoned them after 3DFX tried to make cards themselves. It was a perfect storm of corporate incompetence. In December 2000, Nvidia bought 3DFX's assets for about $70 million. Not the company, just the patents, the brand, and the technology. The company that invented mainstream 3D gaming was worth less than a single mansion in Silicon Valley. 3DFX employees lost their jobs right before Christmas. The brand that had defined PC gaming for 4 years was gone. Nvidia got SLI, some patents, and the satisfaction of destroying their biggest rival. The lesson from 3DFX's death was clear. In the GPU industry, you innovate or you die. Standing still means falling behind. Getting arrogant means getting destroyed. Nvidia would remember this forever. 3DFX is still remembered fondly. Retro PC enthusiasts hunt for voodoo cards. The 3DFX name evokes pure nostalgia, but nostalgia doesn't pay the bills. Nvidia won, and they were just getting started. But Nvidia's victory created a problem. Without 3DFX, who would keep them honest? Who would push them to innovate? Who would give gamers an alternative? Enter ATI Technologies, a Canadian company that had been making GPUs quietly in 3DFX's shadow. With 3DFX gone, ATI saw an opportunity, and in 2000 they launched a product that would turn a two-horse race into, well, it's still a two-horse race, but a better one. The Radeon, Nvidia's new rival, and the beginning of a war that continues to this day. Nvidia versus ATI. Picture two heavyweight boxers who fight every 6 months for a decade straight. Sometimes green wins, sometimes red wins. The lead changes constantly, and gamers benefit from every single punch. This was the golden era of GPU competition. Every generation brought massive improvements. Prices were aggressive. Innovation was constant. It was beautiful. For a few years, Nvidia dominated. GeForce 2, GeForce 3, GeForce 4. ATI was competitive but always second place. Then in 2002, ATI released the Radeon 9700 Pro, and everything changed. The 9700 Pro didn't just beat Nvidia's GeForce 4 Ti 4600. It destroyed it, like 50% faster in some games, destroyed it. It had DirectX 9 support before Nvidia. It was cooler, quieter, and made Nvidia look foolish. For the first time, ATI wasn't just competitive, they were the best. Tech reviewers recommended the Radeon. Forums praised ATI. It was a genuine changing of the guard. Nvidia's response? The GeForce FX series. And oh boy, the FX 5800 Ultra became infamous for one thing. It's cooler. The Flow FX cooler was so loud that reviewers called it the Dust Buster. It literally sounded like a vacuum cleaner. But the noise wasn't even the real problem. The FX series was slow. Despite all that heat, all that noise, all that marketing, the GeForce FX 5900 still lost to ATI's 9800 Pro in most games. Nvidia had stumbled. The Half-Life 2 fiasco made it worse. Nvidia allegedly worked with Valve to optimize for their cards. When the game launched, ATI cards performed significantly better. Conspiracy theories flew. Nvidia looked desperate. But Nvidia doesn't stay down. In 2004, they released the GeForce 6800 Ultra. And just like that, they were back. The 6800 Ultra matched or beat ATI's X800 series. It had better shader performance. It ran cooler than the FX disaster. The generational leap was massive. Nvidia had learned from the FX failure. They focused on efficiency, not just raw specs. They made cards that were actually good, not just loud. From this point, Nvidia and ATI traded blows constantly. 7800 GTX, X1800 XT, 8800 GTX, HG 2900 XT. Each generation, someone took the crown, then lost it, then took it back. In November 2006, Nvidia released the 8800 GTX. This card was so far ahead of everything else that ATI couldn't respond for almost a year. The 8800 GTX was the first DirectX 10 card. It was twice as fast as the previous generation. It was legendary. The 8800 GTX created Can It Run Crisis, the meme that defined an era. Crisis launched in 2007 and melted everything except high-end systems. Having an 8800 GTX meant you could almost run Crisis well. Almost. But in 2006, something changed. ATI wasn't just ATI anymore. A CPU company bought them. A company that was fighting its own war against Intel. A company that wanted to combine CPUs and GPUs into something new. AMD bought ATI for $5.4 billion. The GPU wars were about to enter a new era. AMD rises. Picture a company already fighting a war on one front, CPUs against Intel, suddenly deciding to open a second front against Nvidia. Bold? Yes. Risky? Extremely. Did it work out? Well, eventually. The AMD acquisition of ATI was supposed to create synergies. APUs, integrated solutions, the future. The reality was more complicated. The transition wasn't smooth. The first AMD Radeon cards were really just rebranded ATI products. The HD 2900 XT was hot, power-hungry, and lost to Nvidia's 8800 GTX. AMD was playing catch-up immediately. The ATI brand gradually disappeared. By 2010, it was just AMD Radeon. Some fans mourned ATI. Others embraced the new identity. But the real question was, could AMD GPU compete with Nvidia long-term? Nvidia wasn't waiting. They released the GTX 200 series, then the legendary GTX 400 and 500 series. The GTX 480 ran so hot it became a meme. The reference cooler could cook eggs, but it was fast. AMD struck back with the HD 7970 in 2012. The first 28nm GPU, the first with 3GB of VRAM, and crucially, it launched before Nvidia's equivalent, the GTX 680. AMD actually beat Nvidia to market, a rare occurrence. The HD 7970 and GTX 680 traded blows. Nvidia won some benchmarks. AMD won others, but AMD had something Nvidia didn't. Killer value with the HD 7950 and HD 7870. The bang for buck champion was born. This became AMD's identity, maybe not the fastest, but the smartest choice. The GPU for people who do research. The GPU for people who watch benchmark videos before buying. The enthusiast value pick. AMD continued fighting. The R9 290X in 2013, hot and loud like the GTX 480, but competitive. The R9 Fury X with its exotic HBM memory, innovative but not quite there. The RX 480 in 2016, the budget king that made 1080p gaming accessible, but Nvidia kept pulling ahead. The GTX 970 was a phenomenon, aside from the 3.5GB controversy where Nvidia marketed it as 4GB, but only 3.5 of the gigabytes were fast. The GTX 980 Ti was a beast, and then the GTX 1080, the Pascal generation. Nvidia leaped so far ahead that AMD couldn't respond for years. The 1080 was 40% faster than the 980 Ti. It was efficient, it was quiet, it was dominant. And then, just as the GPU war was settling into a predictable pattern, something completely insane happened. Something nobody expected. Something that broke the GPU market for years. Cryptocurrency miners discovered that GPUs were excellent at mining Ethereum, and suddenly gamers couldn't buy graphics cards at any price. The crypto and scalper wars. Picture wanting to buy a graphics card. A simple transaction, money for product. Except the product doesn't exist, or it costs 3 times MSRP, or you have to fight bots online, or someone's grandmother is camping outside Best Buy at 4 a.m. For nearly 5 years, buying a GPU at retail price was essentially impossible. This wasn't a war between companies. This was a war between gamers, miners, scalpers, and sanity itself. It started in 2017. Ethereum's price exploded. Mining Ethereum with GPUs was profitable, very profitable, and miners bought every GPU they could find. RX 470s, 480s, 570s, 580s, anything AMD made disappeared. A $200 RX 580 suddenly cost $400, then $500, then $600. Gamers who just wanted to play PUBG were competing with mining operations buying hundreds of cards. It wasn't fair, it wasn't fun, it was capitalism. Nvidia GPUs got hit too. The GTX 1060 and 1070 became mining favorites. Stock evaporated. Gamers watched prices climb and climb while miners posted pictures of their 30 GPU rigs. Crypto crashed in 2018. Prices normalized briefly. Gamers rejoiced. And then, 2020, COVID-19, global pandemic. Everyone stuck at home wanting gaming PCs. Factory shutdowns. Supply chain chaos. And to make it worse, crypto came back. Nvidia launched the RTX 3080 in September 2020 at $699. A phenomenal card. Revolutionary performance. You couldn't buy one, anywhere, for months. Bots bought entire stock drops in seconds. Cards appeared on eBay for $2,000. The RTX 3060 Ti launched, sold out. The RTX 3070 launched, sold out. The RTX 3090, a $2,000 card, sold out. AMD's RX 6000 series also sold out. Nothing was safe. An entire scalper economy emerged. People used bots to buy GPUs, then resold them for double or triple. Entrepreneur became a dirty word. GPU Discord servers became wartime communications. Stock trackers became essential apps. The Best Buy drop became an event. People drove hours to stores. They waited in freezing cold. They showed up at 4 a.m. for a chance at a graphics card. It was dystopian. It was absurd. It was real. Some gamers gave up. They bought pre-built PCs because that was the only way to get a GPU at reasonable prices. Others waited years. Some switched to consoles. The GPU market had broken. And then, relief, Ethereum switched to proof of stake in 2022. Mining GPUs became worthless overnight. Miners dumped cards. Prices crashed. Suddenly, you could buy a GPU at MSRP from a store like a normal person. Gamers cheered, then immediately started arguing about whether to buy used mining cards. Is the card damaged? Miners actually take care of their hardware. Don't support miners by buying their cards. The community never stops debating. The ray tracing revolution. Picture a technology demo that makes everyone go wow, but nobody can actually run. That was ray tracing in 2018. Impressive, revolutionary, and at the time, mostly theoretical. Nvidia bet the company on ray tracing. They were either visionaries or fools. Turns out they were visionaries. Eventually in 2018, Nvidia revealed the RTX 20 series. Jensen Huang stood on stage, leather jacket impeccable, and showed us real-time ray tracing. Light bouncing accurately. Reflections showing actual geometry. The holy grail of graphics. The catch? The RTX 2080 Ti cost $1,200, and when you enabled ray tracing, your frame rate died. Games went from 60 FPS to 30 FPS. You paid more for less performance in ray-traced games. It was a tough sell. Critics said ray tracing was a gimmick. Who cares about puddle reflections became a meme. The technology was real, but the hardware wasn't ready. Nvidia was ahead of its time. Way ahead. Nvidia's solution? DLSS. Deep Learning Super Sampling. Use AI to upscale lower resolution images to look like higher resolution. Render at 1080p, display at 4K, get most of your frames back. It was genius. DLSS 1.0 was rough, blurry, noticeably worse, but DLSS 2.0? DLSS 2.0 was magic. Sometimes the upscaled image looked better than native. Suddenly ray tracing was viable. The feature nobody wanted became the feature everyone needed. AMD finally responded with RDNA 2 and the RX 6000 series. Ray tracing support. FSR as their DLSS competitor. Competitive performance. AMD was back in the high-end fight after years of Nvidia dominance. But AMD's ray tracing was slower than Nvidia's, and FSR wasn't quite as good as DLSS. AMD had competitive rasterization, but fell behind in ray tracing. The feature that didn't matter suddenly mattered a lot. FSR 2.0 and 3.0 improved. Frame generation arrived. But Nvidia kept pushing. DLSS 3 with frame generation. Path tracing in games like Cyberpunk 2077. The ray tracing arms race was on. And just when you thought the GPU war was settled, Nvidia and AMD forever, a third player entered the ring. A company with infinite resources. A company that had tried and failed before. A company named Intel. Intel Arc. The return of the third competitor, and somehow the most chaotic GPU launch in recent memory. The modern battlefield. Picture a two-player fighting game that suddenly adds a third character. The dynamics change. The balance shifts. And the new character? The new character has issues. Nvidia dominates. AMD competes. And Intel? Intel is trying really hard, like really hard. The results are mixed. Intel launched Arc in late 2022. The A770 and A750 offered competitive performance at good prices. On paper. In reality, driver issues. Compatibility problems. Games that ran 30% slower than they should. Old games sometimes ran terribly. New games sometimes ran great. Resizable BAR was basically mandatory. Intel was essentially asking customers to beta test their products. Enthusiasts complied. Regular users suffered. But here's the thing. Intel kept updating drivers. Performance improved. By 2024, ARC cards became genuinely viable budget options. Not perfect, but good. Intel earned respect through persistence. Nvidia's RTX 40 series launched in 2022-2023. The RTX 4090, a monster, nearly twice as fast as the 3090, the most powerful gaming GPU ever made. Also, $1,600. Also, some of them caught fire. But details. The 4080 was excellent, but overpriced. The 4070 Ti and 4070 were fine, but felt like previous generation performance at current generation prices. Nvidia was dominant, but getting greedy. AMD countered with the RX 7900 XTX and 7900 XT, competitive in rasterization, cheaper than Nvidia, but still behind in ray tracing. The pattern continued. AMD, better value. Nvidia, better features. And then everything changed again. AI exploded. ChatGPT, stable diffusion, large language models, and guess what trains and runs AI? Nvidia GPUs. Nvidia became the most valuable company on Earth because of AI, not gaming. Gaming is now almost a side business for Nvidia. Their AI chips make so much money that GeForce is practically a hobby. The GPU war has become something bigger, something that affects the entire tech industry. Think about it. We went from 3DFX making 3D possible, to Nvidia destroying them, to ATI challenging Nvidia, to AMD continuing the fight, to cryptocurrency breaking everything, to ray tracing revolutionizing graphics, to AI making GPUs the most important chips on the planet. Every generation, someone said graphics can't get better than this. Every generation, they were wrong. Every generation pushed further, and we're still not done. The GPU wars made gaming better. Competition forced innovation. Nvidia's dominance pushed AMD to try harder. AMD's value pushed Nvidia to offer more. Even Intel's messy entry gave consumers more choice. 3DFX died, but their legacy lives on. ATI became AMD, but the spirit of competition survived. And somewhere, Jensen Huang is still wearing that leather jacket, announcing another GPU that makes the last one look ancient. The war never ends, it just renders at higher frame rates. Alright, I want to know what's your GPU history. First GPU you ever owned, best GPU you ever owned, worst purchase you ever made, and most importantly, Team Green, Team Red, or are you one of those brave Intel Arc pioneers? Drop it in the comments. Let's see those specs. And if you want to see us cover the CPU wars, the console wars, or the RAM wars, make sure you subscribe and let us know, because these tech rivalries are what make PC gaming special. And we'll be here benchmarking every frame, analyzing every launch, and judging every leather jacket alongside you. Until next time, may your frame rates be high, your temperatures be low, and your GPUs be in stock. GG.